there are some questions. Mr. Eric Solheim has to leave soon, but there was a question sent to him and to Professor Faisal from India by Mrs. Li Xing, who herself has to catch a plane soon. But she's asking the two of you, Mr. Eric Solheim and Professor Faisal, or Stephen, sorry. She says, why the Western countries have so many misunderstandings to Chinese civilization? What are their suggestions on how to tell the China story or narrative to them? So what can we do to explain China to people in the West?
Eric, please.
I think a starting point, which is very important, is to restart all sorts of people-to-people contact after COVID, because true, there are underlying interests. I mean, people who don't want a good relationship between China and the US. I mean, there are certain circles or between China and the West, there are certain circles in the US who try to promote a bad relationship. But nothing was helped by COVID, because COVID stopped tourism, made business contacts, academic contacts, everything a lot more difficult. So to restart all this as fast as possible, get tourists to visit, of course, Chinese tourists to come to Europe, European and American tourists to go to China, open up the air routes. There still are much fewer flights than there was before COVID, opening up academic contacts, make sure that business people are visiting in both directions. Some of this has started, but it's still slow compared to the situation before COVID. And all this will help. It will not solve all problems, but it will help. So Prime Minister Li's visit to Germany and France is a very good starting point for this, but we simply need to step up all the contacts a lot more. Then, of course, we need to fight back. There is a lot of negatives about China in Western media at the moment. The counter-narratives must be put forward. China is today the most modern society on the planet. If you go to, say, Guangzhou or Shenzhen, you will be taken aback by the modernity of China, while many Westerners still have an impression of China as a kind of something similar to the Soviet Union, or a place with an enormous amount of pollution, which was the case 15 years ago, but it's basically disappeared everywhere. So you need to set out a new narrative about China, and also the fact that China historically has been a very peaceful nation. China has not been involved in any war since 1979 with Vietnam, while the United States has basically been involved in every war in the world in the last decades, in one way or the other. So opening up all sorts of contacts and getting the counter-narrative into media and the global conversation is my main suggestions. If you finally will allow me a somewhat related comment, because I think we all agree that the idea of decoupling is suicide, as was said there. It is very dangerous. It will be an enormous loss for everyone, for China, for the West, and for developing countries, for everyone. But there is also another issue of de-risking, which need to be handled in an appropriate way, because we need to kind of establish some sort of rules. China will not allow Microsoft or Amazon to build the basic infrastructure in China, because China sees that as something where they want domestic control. So, say for Europe to say that some basic infrastructure in Europe will be made by Ericsson or by Siemens, that is not irrational. That's basically applying the same rules for Europe and for China. And also, of course, European companies want control of some of the value chains. Again, that is not irrational. I mean, China is not totally dominant in all the value chains for the green economy. I mean, everything related to batteries or electric vehicles. China is and renewables, and is far ahead of anyone else, totally dominant. The people in the West have not realized yet, but business is realizing it. And of course, European companies want some control over their value chains. That applies to the competition with China, but also to the competition with the United States and others. That again is not irrational, but it needs to be handled in the context of the World Trade Organization or accepted global rules. So I think what Li Qiang initiated during his German and French visit was very helpful, because we need a practical conversation as to how we can manage the business competition within framework of global cooperation. But our all turned up, we need to fight back against all those who want to decouple, all those who smear China in Western media. It's very unhelpful, very dangerous, and we need to fight back, and we need to open up as many levels of contacts as possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Solheim. There was a question submitted first. It sounds partially as a consular affairs question, but also a question on communication. Mrs. Marina Kerber, she says that I have so far contacted the Chinese embassies in Croatia and Serbia regarding the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. Either you don't get an answer, or the answer is not saying anything. How could this be done better? I expect a lot of China, and this is a compliment. So I don't know if Councillor Wang wants to address that question, but it sounds more like a consular affairs question. Serbia and Croatia, the embassies, how can get more information from them about the BRI? Somebody suggested that we could get more information from Professor Peng Ke-ming from Guangzhou. He says we can provide you all the information you want as academics. There are other sources of information of the BRI, but why? How to communicate with the Chinese embassies in Serbia and Croatia?
I think so. We can help try to contact our colleagues in the embassies in Croatia and Serbia, and to find out what the problem is, and hope we can help them to have a better exchange and communication.
Yeah, thank you. One advice my experience, if you in the country where you are, you want to have official information from embassies, you contact the embassy where you live, not contact embassies in another country. So I think that question is answered. We have a question for Professor Faisal Ahmed by Ulf Sandmark in Sweden. He says, Professor Faisal Ahmed mentioned the importance of the film industry to promote cultural dialogue among especially young people. I had the privilege to visit Beijing and the Center for Promotion of Touristic Trade. There, the quality of all the actors in tourist trade were systematically improved to become very important actors in the dialogue of civilizations. The knowledge of the workers in touristic sites, hotels, transport, and restaurants were systematically improved with help of the most advanced academic experts. Does Professor Ahmed or someone else want to comment on using films, tourist industries, and other self-financing trades to bring masses of more actors into the dialogue of civilization? Also possibly with other youth exchange activities, sports, and music events.
Yeah. I think this is a very important point that has been raised. From the previous question and this one also, what we generally need to understand at this moment is that there is need for repositioning of the image or the brand of China, which has actually been largely being damaged by the Western narratives today, including the American narrative. So a repositioning actually is required, which is very, very important. And repositioning is like making a new image in the mind of the people so that they understand the correct image and not go by the Western narratives. In fact, if we look at try to know about China, all the civilizational prowess, all the great civilizational prowess that China possesses, it's no longer in the discourse, because everything has been, overpowered by those fake narratives. So therefore, I think that some of the points that one issue that the films that they mentioned, there are other issues, including films I'll talk about. We have to see, the whole issue is about confidence building measures. Now, if you go for confidence building measure, one of the best way for improving or enhancing the confidence building measure is the people to people contact. So therefore, opening up tourism and business to business meetings, like relaxations in the visa norms for more business to business interactions. The scholarships to study, this is very, very significant as a soft power, because if you look at the United States, they've given huge amount of scholarships to countries across the world to develop a pro-American orientation over a period of time. And now China would also be looking for, when it is striving for becoming a making a significant impact on the world and the civilizational impact on the world. I think it should be looking for putting up a lot of scholarships, opening up a lot of scholarships in various fields of interest for students coming from different countries of the world, so that they have a understand the Chinese characteristics and the Chinese way, and when they go back to their own countries and join government, they have some orientation toward the understanding of the Chinese policy in a positive way. At the same time, one very significant thing, I think, which is worth understanding from what various few countries like the United States have been doing, addressing students in different countries on official visits by leaders, head of state or head of government. When we have seen in 2010, President Obama coming in India, he didn't come to Delhi straight away, New Delhi straight away. He went to Bombay and addressed students, undergraduate students of St. Joseph or some college in, undergraduate students of some college in Mumbai, in an open air, amphitheater, and he was standing and speaking to the students, and students were raising questions on him, right from United States to Pakistan to Kashmir issues to China issues and everything, and he was just responding to them. Of course, in a very sometimes being more diplomatic, sometimes in a different way. But then the point is that this interaction becomes very important in enhancing the image of a country. I mean, when leaders go on official visit, like the ministers or the head of state or the head of government, and if they organize a meeting like this in one of the prestigious universities in those countries, and answer and address the local students and let them ask few questions which they can respond to, that goes way ahead in enhancing the image of the country. This is what exactly happened in India when President Obama addressed the students. I mean, there was a huge, a pro-US orientation everywhere in India because President Obama was talking to the students directly. Then another thing, like when we talk about BRI, one of the biggest narrative that comes in, BRI is about debt trap or BRI is facing implementation problems. Now, these two issues have to be handled through a counter narrative. There has to be some research-oriented, articles or research-oriented counter-narrative, which actually says clearly, giving examples. And I read Hussein's, I think, one of the posts on LinkedIn, which was, quite interesting to go through, which actually talks about that no, BRI is not a debt trap, and some of these should come from governments in China, and some of these should come from experts and scholars across the world as well, and who are not necessarily from China. Then, because this is a very general understanding, if you talk to anyone anywhere in the world, especially in India, if you talk about BRI, so there are only two things: it's a debt trap by China, and it's facing a lot of implementation issues, it's not going to be successful. These are the two key points which need to be addressed. Now, the issue about the films which have come up is very interesting. As I told you, it's a matter which issue which connects people. I wrote one article earlier also with a Chinese friend on that was largely on India-China film diplomacy. But then that made sense, because this is how you develop a geocultural connect and a people-to-people connect. Today, it is very important that Chinese films, because we have Netflix, various types of OTT platforms, so a lot of Chinese films and dramas, television dramas, they can actually be marketed through Netflix and various OTT platforms. If you look at India today, one of the very significant, films and dramas which have taken up is from South Korea. So today, every kid today wants to watch on Netflix and OTT something coming out from which is a South Korean film or South Korean drama, and of course these are not in English. So most of the time they are in their Korean language, but you get a script of English translation below that. So exactly the same thing if it can be marketed OTT and Netflix platforms for film and episode-based, serials and dramas which can be marketed by the Chinese industry, that will make immense impact on enhancing and developing its outreach among the younger generations in different countries. And one example I would say is, like, we take the example of things like Doraemon in Japan, which has created a huge impact. Like, I mean, every child would like to, just because they have seen Doraemon, so they believe that Japan is like full of fantasy, and they would like to visit Japan at any point of time, having a very, positive image about the country. I think most of these this is happening in the age group of people who are between 16 to 25 years of age. And therefore, cinema and these OTT and Netflix platform can create a really huge impact in image makeover and repositioning of any country. So I think these are the points that I wanted to just talk about. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Li Xing.
Yeah, I agree with Professor Ahmad's comment, but I think that what Basar said, most things are taking place, efforts taking place outside the West. But now I'm living in the West, so I witnessed how the West is becoming more and more paradoxical, paranoid, and very reactionary towards China. The Confucius Institute used to be a bridge. It's closed everywhere. In my university, it's closed. I established 2 China-oriented educations. They were closed. So somehow the West become very much rejective towards this kind of civilizational exchange. So how we can improve a situation here, it's quite a big challenge. I think Hossein did a good job in terms of give counter-narratives, different narratives. But I think what I do is that I try, in my teaching, in my role, I try to convince the West is that your vision is not shared by the majority of the world population anymore. You do not represent, when the United States talk about the rule-based order, but that order is the Western order. Other countries do not agree. For example, Cambridge University published this new global survey, shows that the great division between North and South, the North, 1.2 billion population, they are very negative towards China, towards Russia. But the global South exactly is the opposite. They are very much overwhelmingly positive towards China, and also quite a large percent, 66% positive over Russia. It's great surprise to the West. Even the Munich Security Conference report shows that there is no single country in the global South that joined the sanction. Okay, they condemn, that's discourse level, but in action, they never. So even the West recognized that there is a division between the Western's worldview and the global South. So now I think we should promote this and try to convince the West that you are not representative anymore. I think this is also one way of doing things. Thank you.
I just a reflection in my trip tour in China. As I said, I was in 6 different provinces, different parts of China, and I had lectures in 6 different universities and academic institutions. But there's enormous frustration by the students that China is trying to help the world with the Belt and Road, poverty alleviation, but everything, all we get back is this resentment from the West and so on. So I say, first of all, you have to look at the facts, because every week, China and the Belt and Road wins new friends.
Yes.
And the adversaries of China and the Belt and Road lose friends every week. And more nations are joining the Belt and Road and China. So this is it's very important for people to think about reality rather than the narratives. But then on the part of narrative, I mean, most people complain that the Chinese are not good in communicating the good things they do, which is in a certain way. But China is, has been focused on other things. China has been focused on doing real poverty alleviation, developing the economy, developing the culture inside the country. They don't want to dominate others. They don't want to tell others what to do. And therefore, they have not had this policy of imposing or, but you take a comparison. In 2021, the US Congress unanimously voted for the Strategic Competition Act 2021. Now, there are 3 articles inside that act pertain to the Belt and Road and China, and they established a fund called the Encountering China Influence Fund. And the funding is $300 million each year for 5 years. That's $1.5 billion that will be spent through American embassies to spread narratives about China through bloggers, so-called independent media, buying journalists, buying people with money to spread narratives about negative narratives about China. Now, you can build 30 modern hospitals every year with that money in Africa, which would be much more helpful for the image of the United States rather than, but China does not do that. China does not, spread negative narratives about other nations, but there is need by China within the framework of respecting the sovereignty of other nations to promote what China is really about. I mean, one simple thing is, there should be people should see how Chinese people live every day. I saw that myself, and I saw one very fascinating phenomena. I go out walking around the area, around the hotel where I used to live, or just take a taxi with someone, a translator. And you see in parks, in public places, people are dancing. They have music and they dance. It's like this is their after work. And the people are so happy and joyful and optimistic. I haven't seen such a phenomena in any other country, especially here in the West. We are very pessimistic. We have enormous crises. Our culture is, in trouble, and people are depressed, scared. But the Chinese people, they live a different life. But at the same time, they see all the terrible things happening around the world. And of course, that's a matter of concern. But they should never forget that they have done a great job in China, but also they are gaining new friends every day. Never forget that.
Yes, thank you, Hussein. I would just add a few points. Were there any other specific questions you wanted to bring up yet, or?
We don't have from the questions from the attendees now.
Okay.
Wait a minute. There's Ulf Sandmark. I think it's a question to Professor Mironchik. Ambassador Pironchik, sorry. He says the BRI flagship Great Stone project in Belarus is a very active part in China-Europe trade. What is the situation currently with physical trade and transport with Western Europe, considering the effects of the conflict in the neighboring countries, i.e. Ukraine?
Indeed, the Great Stone Industrial Park is what was once called the gem of the pearl of the Belt and Road Initiative by President Xi. And we totally agree with this description. What is peculiar about the Great Stone is a combination of it being part of the logistic chain between China and Western Europe, and at the same time it being a center, a hub for development of cutting-edge technologies in many spheres. We see this as a combination which guarantees sustainable development of the Great Stone, regardless of the political weather. But even under the weather, as it is now, I should point out that the trade flows going through Belarus, they are demonstrating remarkable resistance to negative influences of political disagreements or of sanctions and counter-sanctions which are being applied now by the West and Russian Federation. First and foremost, we see that the railroad project and Great Stone and Belarus is the part of the railroad axis between the Western Europe and China, is demonstrating remarkable speed of development. To give you an anecdotal evidence, I get requests from companies to help them get their cargo on this rail. And as my colleagues tell me, we already experienced the bottlenecks along this railroad, especially the Trans-Siberian part. But I think as we get closer to the exhaustion of the current capacity of the existing railroad network, we are also getting closer to new initiative aimed at expansion of this capacity. I am not able to produce off-the-cuff exact figures right now, but please rest assured that railroad connection between China and Western Europe through Belarus works smoothly and without any major problems. It is also in demand due to several reasons. First of all, and foremost, this is the result of natural development of China, because attention given to the development of the continental part of China, of the inner provinces of China, is bearing fruit. And we see that industrial output in Western China is increasing exponentially. Together with it, increases its exposure to foreign trade and increased trade flows from continental China, from Western provinces of China towards Western Europe. And we also see that trains traveling from the west towards China, which at times, some 10, 12 years ago, were sometimes traveling with empty containers, they are now traveling fully loaded. Belarus also contributes to the growth of these volumes of cargo being transported, in part due to complicated overall situation. Like, we are experiencing problems which are remarkable in themselves, especially against the background of the global food crisis, because decisions adopted by the European Union are impeding us from supplying customers all over the world, especially in Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, with Belarusian fertilizers through what once has been normal route, Baltic seaports. We no longer have access to these seaports, which contradicts, in fact, international law, providing certain guarantees to landlocked countries like Belarus, contradicts to common sense. But thanks God, we have railroad connection with China, and a lot of fertilizers are now being transferred via land. Another reason, of course, we see that, especially during pandemic, when a lot of countries experienced problems with their supply chains and the speed of supply, maritime supply, railroad supplies, which are at least twice and at times 3 times as fast as maritime routes, have proven to be really effective, and they help to bring down the costs of production, making final products more accessible to the people who are now experiencing, in many parts of the world, economic problems, also artificially created economic problems caused by application of sanctions or other instruments which should be left in the past, really. Sorry for not providing you exact figures. You caught me a little bit by surprise by your question, but I hope that I gave you a description of the current situation, which is of use. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the answer gives enough information on the status of the situation. I mean, I know personally, through research I've done, that, for example, despite all the tension between the EU and Russia and Belarus, actually Poland is now developing the rail connection and logistics hub on the border with Belarus, at Malawice-Brest connection on the border. And as you said, Your Excellency, actually the freight has been increasing between China and the EU through Russia, Belarus, something which we reported about last year, which was interesting to see. But like Poland, the EU refused to finance that project on the border with Belarus. So the Polish government decided that they will finance this important project because it's for the future of Poland. That the new Silk Road, as I think the Polish railway director said, we quoted him in our report, he said, this is our future. It's important for Poland's future to build this and expand the new Silk Road, the Iron Silk Road, or the China-EU express rail. So this is a very telling thing about the difference between reality and ideology, between the needs of the people and where politicians have their mind. And I think this brings us to the question of we have the biggest crisis in Europe right now is Ukraine, of course, and the question of Ukraine being a bridge between the East and West rather than it becoming a new Berlin Wall. is very, very important. But I know that Ukraine was one of the first countries actually that joined the Belt and Road already in December 2013.
I think what my colleague emphasized is the fundamental factor, which is the reality of how the world is changing and the reality of what is occurring with the BRI, the recognition of the great majority of people and nations working together with it. That has to get out. Now, the problem that we have, I think, was identified by Mr. Solheim, that in addition to creating the people-to-people contacts, which are very crucial, even understanding the need to learn Mandarin, to read, the Chinese are very actively engaging in learning English to reach the world. I think it's very important that it goes in the other direction. Maybe the purpose of shutting down some of these institutes has been to prevent that. But the other thing that I think Mr. Solheim mentioned is we have to fight. Now, it doesn't mean military fighting, which is not helpful under the circumstances that the world is facing, but it does mean that there has to be a fight for truth. Because what is going on with this demonization, with the debt trap, these scenarios have come out of a foundation in the US, the Jamestown Foundation. The story about genocide in Xinjiang, the debt trap story. These they're not mistakes. These are intentional distortions of reality and the truth. And that is where I think we have to engage ourselves in a dignified way, because you cannot have a functioning communication and dialogue where you are at least reaching the basis of respect for one another in terms of culture and nations, if you have no respect for the truth. And that has to be a challenge. The unfortunate fact is that the great majority of citizens in the West are being bombarded by mainstream media sources with ideas which are intentionally misrepresenting things. That is a challenge that I think we can meet by this kind of event, by further engagement in interviews, which I'm happy to do with the Russian International Affairs Council, with other institutions that I was so grateful to be able to speak at the major event in China. I hope that perhaps my colleague and I will be returning soon. We have to demonstrate that the principles, some of which I attempted to delineate in my remarks, that this tradition that we have had in the West at certain times, which has stood for a notion of the goodness of human beings. The United States essentially had been founded on those very principles, very much influenced by Leibniz. These are the criteria that has to be raised as the battle cry, whereby not tolerating deliberate falsifications, which are unfortunately a major factor in creating the tensions and the geopolitical dangers that we're up against. But that fight, I think we can do it. I think we will continue to do that with the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, with our friends and allies. And as Martin Luther King once said, we shall overcome.
Thank you. Okay. If there is no other further comments by any of the panelists, then conclude this very, very productive and fascinating webinar.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Councillor Wang, so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for all the insights.
And convey our greetings, of course, to Ambassador Shui.
Yes, thank you very much, Stephen and Hossein. Yeah, and for this wonderful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you and
Thank you.
goodbye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.